Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 21. Just one sec.
Your voice is all high.
It's high. So I've just been told my voice is all high and squeaky high, is it?
A bit fast.
A bit fast, right. Okay, swap that. Maybe I will just have to use the microphone on the webcam. I think that should do it. Welcome once again to episode 21 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Yes, so I'm going to be talking about the photo I did for an amazing group called Soul Soup, which is it was set up a Dumfries-based organisation supporting youth, well, basically from age 12 to 25, mental health support, essentially what it was about. So I'm going to talk a bit about that, and then later in the podcast I will of course be looking at giving feedback, answering questions and what have you that were posted into the Facebook group Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres during the week. Right, so if you happen to find any of this useful, interesting, or you would just like to feel like you were supporting the podcast, then please go to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, where you can buy me a coffee or more if you fancy. Right, okay, so let's move on then. Let's flip over to this photo. So the idea with this photo then, well, okay, let's give a little bit of background about Soul Soup. I say, Soul Soup gives mental health support to young people aged between 12 and 25. Now, when I was approached to see if I could help with a photo for them, I kind of leapt at the chance. Mental health is one of these, it's still a taboo subject. You know, I mean, certainly in the last few years, it's, you know, it's maybe less so. It certainly depends in which circles you move in. But and I suppose actually under COVID-19 lockdown as well, it's sort of raised its head even further. It's now being discussed much more widely about the impact on our mental health of all being in this incredibly unnatural situation. But there is still a kind of taboo. A lot of people don't like to admit to, you know, there's a fear of stigma, the fear that employers might use as an excuse to get rid of us. People won't understand. And so a lot of people who are struggling with their mental health kind of keep it under wraps. Now, as someone, I've had an on-off relationship with depression for a great deal of my adult life. So it's one of these things that is kind of close to my heart. Now, by the time you get to 50 odd plus, most of us who've lasted this long have found coping mechanisms, sometimes even ways completely around the, you know, whatever's bothering us. I think statistically the highest death rate, cause of death for men under 45 is still suicide. It's a shocking statistic. But when you go down to the youth, when you talk about your 12 to 25 year olds, the pressures can sometimes seem enormous. Not only is mental health not something discussed because it can feel really uncool or really dangerous to admit to being vulnerable. The pressures around you are phenomenal. The need to look good, the need to be seen as a prominent member of the tribe, the gang, the group, and then, you know, on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, on every single social media there is, everybody is projecting their best version of themselves. I've had a lot of people talk to me recently about the notion of selfies, being a portrait photographer, and they've said, oh, you know, the fact that everybody's doing selfies, surely that means that a lot more people tend to be much more relaxed in front of the camera. The reality is, no, they're not. The reason people love doing selfies is because they have control over their image. They can take 400 photos and only put up the one where they really think they look the best. As soon as somebody else has got hold of the camera, everybody gets really worried because that somebody else can make you look ridiculous and you have no control over your image. And that control over your image is incredibly important at the best of times. But when you're a teenager or when you're in your early 20s, the pressures around, I mean, everybody is putting on absolutely their best self and exaggerating it. Or at the very least, even if it's not fully exaggerated, the fact that they never balance it with their less than best self means that you're only ever seeing the best possible portrayal of other people. So if everybody else seems to be having this perfect life and you're not, well, obviously then there's something wrong with you. And if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling fearful, if you're feeling low, then you feel absolutely on your own with it. And where's the escape if you're on your own? And that's where the terrifying ideas come in, where for some people they are so low, they are in so much pain, and they are so alone with it that thoughts of suicide feel like the only viable option. And it's not that anybody really wants to kill themselves, it's that they want to stop the pain and they can't think of an alternative. And that's the horrifying bit, is when you are so low that you aren't aware that there are always alternatives. So Soul Soup was set up specifically to offer professional counselling to 12 to 25 year olds. Anyway, they were they were going to be putting on they had a theme that they were a sort of promotion going on, and the idea was called Everyday Superheroes. And with this idea then we started talking about the photo, we started exploring different ideas of what they could do, and the idea came up really, and the idea, I sort of helped lead the discussion, but the idea basically came from Soul Soup themselves, the idea of having people dressed up as superheroes but then in a group therapy session. It's to show really that even superheroes can have mental health problems, even superheroes can suffer from anxiety, depression, all these kind of things. Now, interestingly, if you're into the comic book world, while superheroes can all seem all big, bright and beautiful, there are certain strands which are explored in some graphic novels where superheroes are only too human, and you tend to find actually anybody who becomes a superhero is almost by default got mental health problems. Why do you need to dress up in a costume and go out and try and save the world? It's because of some kind of sense of inadequacy in the self, and is trying to project that out with yourself to try and calm down the anxiety, to try and calm down the sense of helplessness, that people become superheroes. And it doesn't just even have to be dressing up in a costume. In an everyday life, you'll tend to find those people who are very much the most helpful in society, those who are out there making a real difference. The people we call heroes are very often those who have been through a lot of trauma, who have a lot of pain inside, and what they know is they know how bad that feels, and they don't want other people to feel like that, and so they do their level best to try and make the world a little bit of a better place in whatever way they can. So even the most vibrant, out there people, who seem to be, who seem to be quite heroic in what they're doing, very often these are the ones who have the biggest insecurities on the inside. With this idea in mind, this notion then of creating like a group therapy session, so what we've got, if you, there we go, I have to hold down that one. Right, so pictures of superheroes up on the walls, but down in the group therapy, got anxiety, OCD, feelings of feeling suicidal, lost in tears, depression, self-harm. This was the idea. Lots of tissues for wiping away the tears, sitting on the floor. So what we want in terms of lighting, the natural light in the room wasn't strong enough to really give me the quality of photo I needed. So what I ended up doing was I ended up hanging an off-camera flash up on the ceiling so that you had a straightforward downward light. Normally, you know, when you're trying to create impressive photos, you don't do an overhead light, but because we were trying to make it look like a kind of spare room that's been turned over to kind of group therapy session, I wanted that overhead light. And then off to one side I had another light, which is using it as a kind of fill light, just to kind of take out some of the shadows, because the shadows pointing downwards were just really dark. So I needed to add a little bit of extra light onto the scene. So that's the way that I lit it. Now, in order to create the I had to do a separate photo session of each of the people sitting around, you know, in costume, in their heroic poses. And I did that. I did those photos first, did them separately, and then in Photoshop afterwards, I added them in. In the actual room when I took the photo, we stuck up bits of paper onto the wall, but they were just blank. In fact, actually, probably the best thing to do, what I'm going to do at this moment, if technology will allow me, is I do have a wee behind the scenes video, because while we were shooting away, a couple of people got out their mobile phones. The other thing to say with this is, once I knew I was doing this and we were going to be having people dressing up, I immediately got in contact with Ralph Yatesley of B20 Hairdressing Salon in Dumfries, who I've worked with on several projects, to ask him if he would like to come on board and help out. And he was an absolute brilliant. He immediately came on board, brought along Angelique as well to help do the hair of some of the people. So with bits of video from the photo shoot and from getting their hair done, knocked together a quick hold on. Yep, here we go. And yep, let's swing this one here and play. There's a bit of music goes on in the background of this, but just kind of gets in the way. As you can see, down at the B20 salon, which I think has had a refit since. As you can see, this is the room we used. Set up a quick white backdrop. Desperately trying to squeeze into the space there. Getting people to create superhero poses. They all created their own costumes. We all had quite a laugh with it. Yeah, it was a fun day. So once I'd then taken all the individual portraits, we then sort of set up. You can see I've tethered the camera to the laptop so we can all see what's going on and creating the image. And then you can see this was the image, and then that's the edited version. So let's close that, and what I'll do, in fact, if I open this, so I just want to show you this. So this being the final edited version, but this is the unedited version of that photo. So I thought you might be interested to see, you know, you can see just how far it's come along. So having taken those individual photos, so will this work? Yep, there we go. So here are some of the individual superhero shots. So sheet of white fleece hanging over a portable backdrop, and then in Photoshop sort of widened up just a bit more. So we're just going for these kind of bold heroic poses. Nope, not that one, come back to that later. And so those pictures then went into the Photoshop them into the pieces of paper that we had sitting on the wall ready to go. I mean, you can also tell that I've done lightening and darkening. And one of the other things, the most prominent thing here, is I've changed that red wall to a purple one. And quite simply, it was when I was doing the editing, that red is really red, and it's big and it's bold and it's overpowering. And the problem is with that much red is it kind of yeah, sort of dwarf the rest of the picture. The first thing you notice when you look at that picture is this big splash of red. I felt it also meant that the girl here with, you know, crying into the little cape, that she was getting a bit lost into that. Whereas when you turn it to purple, she stands out much more. Everybody else stands out much more. The walls just kind of move into the background, and the whole kind of colour theme worked a bit better. So that was, I think, the only other thing I did was, yeah, I think on the original one, we've got the OCD on his arm goes down the way, and then I sort of turned it OCD that way. Can't exactly remember why. I think it obviously seemed like a good idea at the time. I don't know how much difference it really makes. But that's what that was about. Then they used the photo very shortly after this. They were applying then for a lottery funding of People's Project, and they were up against, I think there was something, was it? Something I can't remember. I think it was on ITV. They were in with 4 or 5 other groups to try and raise money, and they were raising money for a project called Art and Soul, which basically allowed the young people to do upcycling products to sell. So it became a way of fundraising, of giving people new skills, of something to be creative outlet, and then, you know, they could sort of create these amazing things. And it all actually went really well, and they using, I mean, I'm not going to say it's all down to this photo, but this photo was one of the kind of cornerstones of the way they were promoting what they were doing with our everyday superheroes idea, and they were successful, which was really good. Now, I think what I will just do, there is one of these things where, generally speaking, as soon as you do start talking about mental health, it can sometimes be a bit of a trigger for some people. So I'm just going to copy into the comments on here some emergency numbers. So if, you know, and a link to the Soul Soup website if anybody's interested. Right, okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about with that. I'll flip over now just to see whether we have any comments yet. And what have we got? We've got Charlotte. Oh, that's my niece Charlotte. Hi Charlotte, good. So glad you could make it. Becca, hi, really pleased you could come along. I'll be looking at one of your photos later. Brian, hi Kim, good to be with you again. Welcome back, Brian. Siri, hi from Dubai. Oh, Dubai, wow, okay, great. Nice to meet you, Siri. Robert, hi from Scotland. Hi Robert, glad you could make it along. Charlotte, your voice is skipping a bit. I'm guessing that this was a bit earlier. I'm hoping that was a bit earlier. Robert says to control a high voice, and yours isn't really speak from the belly, not the throat. I think it was actually more a thing with the actual microphone. Charlotte, that's better, but you got background fuzz now. Okay, back to normal, Kim. Charlotte, hi Maggie. Stella, hi from Doha. Hi Stella, so glad you could make it. Alright, the chat's going on between my niece and my wife. Stacey, hello from Hatboro. Hi Stacey, I'll be looking at one of your pictures soon. Stacey also says sometimes we use masks to cover feelings. Absolutely we do, absolutely. Pat, as usual, taking me ages to find you. I'm so glad you got here, Pat. Yeah, and basically most of what you missed was me messing up with the technicals at the beginning, so everything's fine there. Oh, okay. I feel a lot better now knowing that there are comments there. So yeah, it doesn't matter if the fact that I'm out here sort of creating my own podcast. The reality is, when it comes to mental health and all the rest of it, I suffer from just the same amount of insecurities as everybody else, and the sense of imposter syndrome that I'm doing this and nobody's watching, right? So let's head back over to okay, that's actually not quite. Right, so what I'm going to do now then is I'm going to move on to the critique section. So for those of you who are here for the first time, the idea here is what happens is I have a Facebook group also called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, which if you join, you can then submit your images to. All of us with our photography, we take photos, and then there's certain photos where we love it, nobody else seems to like it, we're not sure why. We're kind of too close to it. Or there's particular things we tried to capture and we just weren't able to get what we wanted, or the story doesn't feel strong enough, just everything feels a bit too weak. We all have sticking points, we all have blind spots. The problem then is, how do you get genuine feedback on your images? Because the problem is, if you just shove something up on Facebook, everybody clicks like, or they ignore it if they don't like it. So trying to get a decent bit of honest feedback, tactful honest feedback, isn't always easy. So that's the whole point of this half of the podcast now, is that people can submit their images, and then I'll use the skills and insights that I've developed over the last 10 years as a professional photographer to hopefully help you move past your sticking points or blind spots on particular photos. So that's the start then. So I suppose, where shall I start then? Who will I start with? I think what I will start with is Eamon. I will just come in briefly with Eamon. Eamon 2 weeks ago sent me in a picture of a deer that was cropped in. I talked a little bit about it, but he since sent me the original. So let me just drag this into Photoshop and flip across. So what Eamon said was, I haven't got the right piece of information in front of me. One sec, and I will find what Eamon said. No, I will. Okay, it doesn't really matter. I'll spend hours trying to find it now. So basically, what happened was he took this photo and was trying to work out, what else he could have done with it. The reality is, with this image, if I just take a little look at the settings, he said about the fact that it's a very high ISO, and at 1600 ISO, what we find is, as we zoom in, you can see it gets very pixelated. So that's one of the problems with a high ISO. But at the same time, so he was shooting at 320th of a second, which is very high shutter speed, and at f8. So with f8 being a relatively narrow, or starting to narrow down on your aperture, it means there's not as much light getting in. When you're shooting at a high shutter speed like 320th of a second, there's even less light getting in. So the camera will compensate by really whacking up the ISO. And the ISO allows you to shoot in lower light, but at the cost of ending up with a noisier picture where it becomes much more pixelated. And that's kind of what happened here. So there's also, he sent me a crop which was pretty much that, and in the email he sent, he asked if there was another way that he could maybe have presented it. And I think because it's sort of, we can see here, fine, we've taken the deer, but there isn't really much of a context. So all we end up with is a deer that's a bit noisy and fuzzy and isn't really giving us the space we need. But so I think really with something like this, obviously the deer is kind of lost a bit too much, so we do need to crop in. But I think where I'd be very tempted to go with something like this is if you go a little bit more landscape, perhaps, with the picture, bring it down. And we can play rule of thirds, stick the deer into the point whereby it's a third of the way across the picture, and then we end up with a little bit more space around it. This little mound of grass is, maybe it's a bit bright, bit grabbing the attention. So what we might do, let's just take this quickly into camera raw. And what I will first of all do, I think, is vignette it to sort of darken down the corners a bit. I think we can bring a little bit out of the shadows, and then maybe just play with the clarity a little bit, help it to stand out a little bit. Then I think there's bits where we might want to darken down. I will, not that one, I'm going to the burn tool, midtones. We would sort of darken down, actually I'll darken down the highlights a little bit here as well. But then what I'll also do is perhaps brighten up the deer a little bit more as well, or perhaps at the back here get the spots on its coat coming out. So now the deer itself stands out a little bit more. You can see the difference here when it's at this point. This large brighter patch is what's grabbing the attention before we notice the deer. When you darken down the brighter patch there, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make the key focal point of your photo, which is of course the deer, stand out. So that needs to be the first thing that our eyes get drawn to, and it helps if you're doing something like that. So I hope that gives you some ideas with it, Eamon. Is that really, I think, allow the deer to have a bit of context. Don't be frightened of including some of the foliage and what have you. I think it then feels like you really are. I mean, it's beautiful. You've turned. It's looking straight down your lens. You've managed to capture that point where it's, my deer photos, the tiny handful I've got are nearly always with the back end. You just see the back legs disappearing into the trees. So it's a lovely thing. You're out for a walk. You see the deer. You've managed to capture it. Don't feel you have to zoom right in. If the quality of the photo isn't there, come back out a bit and allow some of the surround. So I hope that gives you some ideas then. Right. Okay. Okay, I've got a comment here from, now you're going to have to forgive my pronunciation of your name, Shraddha Pujari. Hi, just joined for the first time, welcome. Which editing app do you use? Well, basically I use Photoshop, and I use Photoshop Creative Cloud. As a professional photographer, I need the best editing software I can get, which pretty much is Photoshop. And I use Creative Cloud, which is where I have where I'm paying a monthly fee, and it's continually updating, so I've always got the latest version of it. Now, not everybody wants to be paying £10 a month, whatever. So some people have older copies of it where it's not updating, and you just. If you have no money, a free alternative is GIMP, G-I-M-P. I've never actually used it, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. So it's supposed to be quite a comprehensive editing software. But by and large, again, you've also, the difference between, say, using editing software as an app on your tablet or your phone is never going to be quite as powerful as one that you use on your desktop. Your desktop programs and always are going to give you more options. I mean, I have Photoshop version for my tablet as well, and it is so limited by comparison. So if I'm editing anything, I always do it on my desktop computer. Okay, well, thanks for that. Right. So let's flip back here and let's take another photo. What have we got here? I think what I'll go with next is Stacy. Now, Stacy, which one am I going to do for you? You sent me 3 different photos. I won't have time to go through all 3, I'm afraid. I will do a couple which you... okay, let's take a little look at this one, because I think there's a kind of quick thing here. Stacy said, I had to step back to get this flag. This is Washington's Crossings Park in Upper Makefield Township. So Stacy's in Pennsylvania, I think it was. So this is an historical area near New Hope. The area dates back to the late 1700s. This particular monument is to commemorate soldiers who died in the Revolutionary War, and graves represent unknown soldiers in 1776. Okay, that's the graves she's got a separate photo for. I'll come to in a minute. Wondering what she could have done with these pictures. And I can see what you've done here, Stacey. So you have to step back to try and make sure you can fit everything in. Wide angle lens, and part of distortion, you can automatically see that the pillars are kind of curving inwards because of the way the wide angle lens distorts. So if I just Control J, I'm going to just create another layer there. Now, one of the things you can do, again, depending on your editing software, but if I go to Edit, Transform, Free Transform, then what I can do is if I hold down the Control button, and I can grab this corner and I can stretch it out and move it about like that. However, what I can do here is if I just pull that up like that, I can kind of straighten that post a bit. And then if I go over to the other side and pull that up, that way I can straighten that post, and hopefully then we end up with a flagpole in the middle which is still sitting straight. So that's one thing. However, to be honest, Stacey, I think the biggest thing with this is you needed to get the wind. You needed to be there when the wind was out, so the flag was actually showing. This flag is drooped. Now, if you were doing a flags at half mast kind of idea, you know, a sagging flag can then maybe echo the overtones of a kind of a downward feeling. But in this case, it isn't. It's supposed to be a memorial. You know, you've got your flag there. You're wanting to really have the flag sticking out. So whilst you manage to catch a memorial flag, if you get a chance to go back there, really you want to go back on a windy day and make sure that, and because then that will really, I think, get your story across. The other picture you sent from the same place was this one, and this was talking about the graves of the unknown soldiers, where you came up close to the stones. And you're wondering what you could have done with it. Now, I think really with this, two things that strike me about it. First of all, well, I mean, before we get to that, I mean, what you've gone for, you've gone for a nice kind of diagonal line that leads your eye down into the picture, and that's good. Each of the gravestones kind of lines up, and each one becomes a smaller echo of the last, and it's a strong diagonal to lead you into the picture. However, I've got a couple of slight difficulties. The first is that the front parts of the stone are just completely, they're blown out with the sun's hitting it, and they've become kind of over bright. But I think the real problem here is, again, there's a sense of needing to have stepped back to give it a bit more room to breathe. Part of the problem we have here is the largest stone, we've got the flags, so if we, you know, where are we? But you've missed the top of the flagpoles here. Now, if again all the rest of them are in, these ones do feel like they've suddenly been kind of cut off. And the other thing is this leads us down here, but then it kind of feels like it just squashes into the edge of the photo. And I feel that you're not giving enough room to breathe there, whereas over on the right, we've now got all this stuff behind this grave, which isn't doing anything for us. In essence, what you needed was the whole thing shifted over a bit. Now, if I go to crop, I'll do content aware just to kind of give you a sense. If we were to sort of drag that out a bit, in fact, actually, let's tell you what we can do. Just let's take that out. That's not going to like that very much. I'll tell you what I will do. I'm going to take this bit, copy, paste, drag it over here, and just, well, let's just flip it, image, edit, transform, flip horizontal, that. Now, it's not ideal, but the point is that I'm just trying to show you, gives you a little bit of extra grass. Then, if we go to the crop, and you bring it in on this side, that gives you a slightly better sense of the movement down through the picture, I think. So it's about being aware of how the lines are drawing you into the picture. And if you're sort of getting drawn into the picture and then you kind of thump against the side of it without any real resolution, then you feel like it's kind of a bit claustrophobic, it gets a bit squashed in. Likewise, if we go back to the original version, as soon as you've got a line running down here, what's on the other side of it, unless there is something very deliberately that you're is looking like it's being half hidden, that you're wanting to draw attention to, all this is essentially wasted space. So if you took that wasted space that's on the right of the photo and had just sort of shifted the camera to the left a little bit and allowed to have the space on the left, then I think the whole thing would have worked a little bit better. Back a little touch further, get the top of the flagpoles in, and I think the whole picture would have just sort of sat a little bit more comfortably. So I hope that helps, Stacey. Right. Okay, and comment from Stacey. I was hoping for wind. Yes. yeah. No, I get that. You're standing there. Okay, you know that's what you ideally wanted, and eventually you realise the wind isn't coming, so you take your photo and you leave anyway. I suppose another option is to swipe a flag from somewhere else and Photoshop it in, but it's not quite the same thing then, is it? Right. Okay, what else have we got here? I think I'll go with Jackie next. So, Jackie. Now, Jackie sent a couple of photos. She sent this one and this one. Now, what Jackie says is, I've submitted these two images so you can get a feel for the vintage idea I was trying to create. How can I improve them, or where did I go wrong? She said in a separate message as well, I've submitted them in various challenges over the past 2 years, but they bomb in every one. Hopefully you can add some extra input. Right. Okay. So, first of all, you're going for a narrative photo. That's great. That's, we're into my territory here. I love doing photos where people are dressing up in costumes. You're trying to go for something which looks cinematic or theatrical. You're thinking about outfits, you're thinking about lighting, you think about background. These are all, this is my bread and butter as such. But what we've got here is so you've done this. You've got a model, or you've got a friend who's come in, got the costume. It's all been exciting. You found a bar to have her seated at, but somehow it's not working, or you feel it's working, but nobody else seems to. So what might be going wrong here, or how might this be able to improve? And I think really there's getting the lighting right is one of the really key things to this, Jackie. And the lighting isn't quite right here. It sort of misses the mark a bit. One of the big things that we've got here is the brightest part of this photo is the bar at the back, even though she's wearing a white dress. Let's just show you this. If I just duplicate that layer for a moment and then filter, I'm going to blur it a lot, to the point whereby, well, maybe not that much, but we go to here, something like that. And what we notice at this point, and in fact actually this is an old trick where you rotate the image just so that you kind of break your notion of what it is you're looking at. When you know you're looking at a person, you just see the person and your brain readjusts everything. But we've flipped the image, we've blurred it out, and what we actually notice is the brightest part of the picture is hold on, let's just grab a pencil, is here. right? That's the brightest part of the picture. Now, if I take away the blur, what have we got? We've got the window. You see, so it's this that's grabbing the attention. So if we now go back to your picture here, the background is overpowering the foreground. When you're creating a narrative picture, in fact when you're creating any photo, you've got a key part of the story. What's the story about? In this case, the story is about the woman in the dress. And then everything about this has to, every other aspect of the picture is either enhancing your narrative or it's detracting from the narrative. And so what you have to do is kind of go around and say, well, what's detracting from it and how would I change that? What's enhancing it, you know? So because she's kind of, you know, her face is more lost in shadow, and the background, you know, we can make out the bottles on the back shelves almost more clearly than we can make out her face. And I think that's really where your primary problem is. There are other things like, you know, the exit sign. I mean, this where you've got a really strong contrast between the brightness of the arrow and the person and the darkness of the dark green background. The reason these kind of signs are done like that is precisely to grab your attention, so if you need to make an emergency exit you can see where to go. Unfortunately, what it means is in this photo that also grabs the attention. So between that and the beer bottles and this window or door here, too much light is happening in the background. I mean, let's say let me just show you, for example, if I take the curves, let's just drop everything down a bit, something like that, and then unmask. That's the quickest way of doing this. Okay, I'll just use the kind of quick selection tool. Not going to be absolutely perfect, but it will give us an idea of what we're trying to do here. Just take that out and a bit at the top, and now we paint her back in. Now if you've got something like that, now maybe the background's too dark with that, but you can start to see that if you go from a bright background and you start just darkening down the background, she starts to come to life a bit more. So in terms of lighting, what you really needed to have done was to have had strong lights lighting her up. Perhaps dial down your shutter speed and your aperture settings such that the ambient light was really quite low, and then you want to make sure that any extra light you're throwing on her, which I presume you know there is a light hitting the side of her arm here and the side of her head, there is a light coming from over here catching her chest and the side of her face and this arm here, so you've got two side light sources coming in, which could create interesting shadow play, but the background is just overwhelming everything. So if you, when taking the photo, if you were to take the photo in the ambient light and just keep dialing it down, underexposing until the background is quite dark, and then light her with whatever other, you know, if you're using artificial lights or whatever, to sculpt the shadows and the light that you want. That will then give a much better balance, I think. The other thing I would say with this is you are trying to create something which was a bit cinematic, so I would talk about the crop here as well. It feels quite kind of square, and I would say if you were kind of going for something, if you're going for something which is a bit more cinematic, go for a kind of cinematic ratio, at which point, you know, we kind of pull this up, pull that down, maybe stretch that out a little bit, something like that. I will just use the okay, I will try that again from there, but I'll use the content aware. Are you going to let me use the content aware? Okay, let's try that. Yeah, I use the content aware just to create the fill. So I want it that wide this way, but we're going to bring it up like this, so you've got a sort of more kind of cinematic crop. Now this is just going to fill in, you know, a bunch of keys repeating itself. and bits and pieces that we don't really. But in terms of, again, sort of blur your vision, you can see that when it's like that, it has more of a cinematic feel to it as well. So sometimes, depending on the kind of photo that you're going for, if you want something cinematic, go for a sort of slightly wider landscape type photo. It can kind of make you feel like you're sort of sitting in the movies, eating your popcorn, wondering what she's going to do next. And at the same time, go ahead and darken down the background. And there's other elements you could play with. You could have a lot of fun with maybe whether there's other people in the photo. Do you have a barman standing off to one side polishing a glass? Do you have somebody coming through that door in the background? And if it was, who was coming through that door? Is it male or female, old, young? Does it look like a member of staff, or does it look like some nefarious person up to no good? I think you start with the dress. You've got your model, you've got your dress, you've got your outfit, you've got your wonderful cigarette holder. But I think there's a lot more. There's a lot of opportunity to really play here, and I think if you started doing that, then you're going to end up with an image which is going to sort of grab much more attention and probably start doing a bit better in the competitions. So I hope that helps, Jackie. I know you've kind of felt a bit reluctant. You've been watching these for several weeks now and weren't sure about whether you should sort of get round to putting anything in. So I hope that feels like that was worth doing. Right, just do another quick check. What we've got, Stacey saying thank you. That's fine. Hot day, no wind until the night. And Pat says, lovely what you did with the deal. Thank you, Pat, much appreciated. Right, just to a quick reminder that if you are finding these podcasts useful and you would like to contribute, support them, then do please head over to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. It's not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is move on to the last photo I've been sent in. Now what have we got here? Sorry, I'll just close those, and there's another one here somewhere. Yep, there we go. This one from Becca. So here we go, and Becca says, this is the photo I feel I could have done better with. Is it too dark? Also, the ducks were really clear when I took the pic, but then having looked at this, it's not so crisp. But what am I doing wrong? What tips would you give to give the same level of clarity to the foliage as with the ducks? Okay, so yes, what we've got here is she sent me the original photo, and yes, what we can see, first of all, it's too dark. We can't really see what's going on particularly well with this. So let's first of all, I will just very quickly take this into camera raw and hit auto adjust to see what that does. Helps a bit. Tell you what, just so I can make it out a bit more, I'm going to boost that exposure a bit more so we can see more clearly what's going on. Take those highlights down a bit. Right, so here we have the photo, and what we've got is we've got duck on what's probably a bit of a branch or something like that here, another one in the background, and yes, as we zoom in, what we notice is the ducks are not in focus. The bush here, the brambles, the little fruit and stuff, the seed pods and stuff there, yep, they're all nicely in sharp focus. Just here, a little bit out of focus in the foreground, but also really out of focus on the ducks. And presumably when you took the photo, it was the ducks that grabbed your attention. Now, the problem that you've got here is, well, actually it's two things here. First of all, let's address the first thing, because the first thing you said was, is it too dark? And yes, we could see that it was too dark. The question though is, why is it too dark? And for that, if I go back and I read, now great, Becca sent me the original version, which makes my life a lot easier because it's got the data in it, so I can see what's going on. So the exposure time 250th of a second, which is quite fast. So A bit like that one we talked about with before. The problem is if you're going with a high shutter speed, there's not so much light gets into the camera. The next thing we've got is it's an f5.6. That's normally okay, but up against that shutter speed is okay. But then you've got a very low ISO, kind of the opposite of the deer here, ISO of 125. Now that's fine in terms of the fact that it gives you a better quality picture, except for the fact that it doesn't allow for lower light photography in the same way. And so because you've got quite a fast shutter speed, I presume it doesn't look like the sun was out, it's probably a bit of a dull day, you're also down into a bit of a ditch, canal kind of thing, so there's not as much light down there. So the shutter speed was quite high for what you were going for. But having said that, you've also got a focal length of 300 millimeters, which is very long. So with this, what this tells me is you're using a big telephoto lens. And the thing is with a great big telephoto lens, and I've talked about this before, is the problem is with that is it exaggerates movement. So, much like, if you've got a pencil, if you start to wobble it a little bit, a little bit of movement at this end becomes a lot of movement at this end. So when you've got a camera with a great long lens, even if your hand wiggles a little bit at this end, it moves much more by comparison. So things can become blurred very easily. So depending on whether you had any auto settings on this, it will have kind of defaulted to doing a higher shutter speed in order to try and counterbalance. So ways around that, you can go for a wider aperture if your lens allows for it, to let a bit more light in. Alternatively, you just boost the ISO. You risk for the fact that it's a bit grainier, but it does allow more light to come in, and at least you do then get your subject. So that's what's happening in terms of light. It's all a balance between your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. And the more you do photography, the more you realize that as you want to get, if there's not enough light, if you work out which one takes the most priority. Is the shutter speed the highest priority for you? Is the aperture the highest priority for you? Is the ISO the highest priority for you? And under different circumstances, you will choose a different priority. And that's how you kind of end up getting the light balance that you want. Now, that's a very, very quick answer to what is a very in-depth subject, for which there are hundreds of thousands of hours of YouTube videos out there. So we've got that. So that's one part of it. The second issue you're talking about here is the fact that it looked fine through the camera, and then when you come back and you look at the photo, you find that the duck isn't in focus, and instead you've got it all focused on the hedgerow, the foliage. Yeah, God, I've had this problem so many times. Now, this comes down to the way you're focusing. Now, for a start, okay, no, yeah, sorry. Two different things are coming into my mind about the notion of the focus. First of all is, let's go back to your f-stop. You've got an f-stop of 5.6, which generally speaking, depending on the lens you've got, is going to give you a depth of field, could be that much, could be that much. The thing is when you've got a zoom, the bigger your zoom, the smaller your depth of field becomes. And so even when you've got a really big zoom here, you've got 300 millimeters, so 5.6 isn't giving you a lot of leeway. If unless you've got it exactly where you want, either side is going to automatically be out of focus. Now, if you had a narrower aperture, if you went for something, an f8, an f16, some f11, f16, something like that, then that gives you a deeper depth of field. And what that means is something like an f16 might have allowed both the duck and the foliage to have been in focus. Maybe the duck at the back wouldn't have been, or maybe you could have got the two ducks in focus and the foliage in the foreground out of focus. But you get a bit more leeway when you've got a narrower aperture. But your offset against this is the fact that then that's not letting as much light in, so you've then got to go with a slower shutter speed, or you've got to go with an even higher ISO. Another way of getting around the slower shutter speed bit is if you've got a tripod, because then you've not got to worry about hand wobble. So I hope that kind of makes sense, Becca. But the other thing I was going to say is the problem of the autofocus. And I mean, the autofocus doesn't always know what it's supposed to be going for. And so in this case, if you were doing autofocus, it's just one of those kind of unlucky, it's latched onto a bit in the foreground and not the bit you actually wanted it to. And this has happened to me so many times, and in fact it's happened to every photographer. I defy any photographer to honestly look me in the eye and tell me that they've never had a problem with the camera not focusing on the wrong thing. It happens to absolutely all of us. Ways around this: one is take more photos than you think you're going to need. Don't rely on one shot, take dozens of shots and hope that one of them will be in focus. If this is an extraordinarily important shoot, I mean, like when I'm doing a shoot for clients, so this is one that I'm going to get paid for, and it's really, really important that the right bits are in focus, what I'm doing then is I tether the camera to a laptop or a tablet, so when I go click, I can see what's going on much more clearly. Because here we end up with the problem of the fact that the back of the camera, even if you've got a really good, quite expensive camera, you tend to only have a screen that's maybe about 3 inches across, and a lot of them are smaller than that. And at that level, you can't make out the detail as to what's really in focus or not. I mean, if I take this photo now and I pull out and I take it down to there, how easily can anybody who's looking at this screen tell what's in focus and what isn't? Well, you can't really. It's only when you zoom in do you start to notice. And depending on the size, now I've got nice big screen so I can see this. But if you happen to be watching this on your tablet, or you happen to be watching this even more worse on a phone, even at this point you might not notice the difference. And I've really got to zoom in here before you're going to notice that this bit is in focus and the duck isn't. So once you understand that this is a common problem, you then need to just really be aware of it. The other option is going manual focus, and that then also kind of depends on your eyesight. And if you happen to wear glasses, I mean, I wear these glasses for reading. They're reading glasses for looking at the computer. This is why I've got them on now. Most of the time, if I'm just walking down the street, I'm not wearing glasses. Now, oddly enough, I've got the settings on my camera. I take my glasses off to take the photo, and then I have to put them back on again to look in the back of the camera to see whether I actually got what it was I was trying to photograph. Now, what you really need to do, I would say then, Becca, is practice. If you want to go down the manual focus route, you need to know that the settings on your camera are adjusted to your eye, because the viewfinder in the back of the camera, some of these actually have a little focal point as well. Let me just grab this camera for a sec and see if I can show you what I mean. Don't know whether you will be able to make out what we're looking at here is this bit here, the viewfinder, as you're looking through it, and just to one side here, really don't know whether that's showing up or not, there's a little dial, and if I can scroll that, and that will actually adjust the focus of the viewfinder, but that's slightly different than the focus on the lens. The focus on the lens is affecting the light that's coming in and then hitting the sensor behind. This is like on a binoculars or a telescope, where it's the bit at the front where you're focusing for your actual eye. So play around with that a bit and make sure that what you're seeing through the camera is the same as what the lens is seeing through the camera is seeing. So for that you need to practice. You do this at home. Stick the camera on a tripod, or if you don't have a tripod, just rest it on some books or something and point it at something. And probably a really good thing to do is to have a lineup of pegs or cans of beans, Doesn't really matter, but have them a bit like Stacey's gravestones, lined up, disappearing at a diagonal into the difference. Pick one of them, somewhere in the middle, focus your camera on it, and then take the photo. Then take a look at the photo and see, did it focus where you thought it was going to? And if it did, whoopee, you now know that it works. If it focused slightly behind or it focused slightly in front, adjust that little bit on your viewfinder, just to make sure that your eyes are then adjusted so that it's working in sync with the camera. And just do this and play around with it for a while, and until you feel confident that when you manually focus the camera, that it is going to be picking up on the same spot that you think it is. And then at that point, if you then feel comfortable with that and you feel that the autofocus isn't going to do what, is playing around, especially in a busy environment. It's a bit like, if we go back to Eamon's deer, the fact that he managed to nail the deer rather than the twigs in front of it was either extraordinarily skillful or a nice bit of blind luck. Either way, it worked. But, in this situation, which you've got with the duck, he could just Eamon could so easily the camera could have so easily just automatically focused on a branch in front that he wasn't even aware of. And likewise here, you wouldn't have even been aware of the foliage, you'd have just been tuned in on the duck. So if you're at that point then where you can't trust the autofocus, you go manual, but at that point you have to feel you can trust your relationship with your camera, and to do that, practice at a point where it's not important. Sunday afternoon or one evening or whatever, whenever's the time good for you, set up a row of beans on the table, or if you've got a kid with some, who's got some toys, or you've got a kid brother, grab his toy soldiers and line them all up. But have that idea, like those war memorial graves of Stacey's, like these, where it's just going boom, 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 boom into the background, and then pick one. So you pick one in the middle, maybe even put a little, stick a little bit of paper on the side of it, or felt tip pen mark or something, just so you know which one you're going for, and that should make a big difference. So I hope that helps, and I hope that answers your question. I think that was the last of the photos I was going to deal with. We've already been chatting for over an hour, so let's flip back here, see if there are any final comments. What have we got? Robert, I don't see cigarette holder, I see a selfie stick. That's referring back to Jackie's picture. Becca, I do wear glasses and had to adjust the settings. Okay, great. So you're aware of that. That's fine then. And Stacey has come in. It definitely takes a lot of practice to capture one subject with a load of things in the area. Yep, for sure. So you're not alone with that, Becca. Great feedback. Oh, Becky, come back in. Great feedback. Thanks. Okay, well, I'm delighted that was useful. Okay, so that's pretty much it. If you've found this useful, do consider the idea of, and buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres if you would like to support these podcasts. Thank you very much for everybody who's taken the time to contribute images and questions, and also to leave comments. Yeah, I always enjoy the comments. It lets me know that I'm not just, because from my perspective, I'm just sitting here looking into a piece of plastic with a lens. So it's good to know that there's actually somebody out there listening. I see it's one of those things that's I've just been reminded of as well is if we go back to the whole soul soup picture and the notion of mental health. There's a lovely quote which is goes something like, there are two kinds of people in this world, those with mental health problems and those who are in denial. And I've always kind of felt it had a bit of a ring of truth to it. I've tried to look to see where that quote came from. Whenever I Google it, it only ever seems to crop up on my blog. So I don't know whether I made it up or maybe I just misquoted somebody else. But yeah, hopefully in my little way here with these podcasts, you're not feeling quite alone with your photography anymore, making the mistakes we all make. I mean, in a way, this just echoes the whole reason for me doing these podcasts and the critique section is because it kind of echoes what I was talking about earlier, which is the thing is we look at all these photos, that other people are putting up, and they put up amazing things, and there's all this brilliant stuff out there, and we just feel completely inadequate by comparison. And what we don't realise is that for every one brilliant photo they put up, they've got 10,000 photos sitting in their folders which didn't work. Every single photographer has photos which focused on the wrong place. Every single photographer has photos where the ISO was at the wrong setting. Every single photographer has got their aperture settings wrong, their shutter speed settings wrong, their, whatever it is. But that's okay. That's okay. One of the things I've talked about before, probably not for several weeks, so it's probably worth repeating, is every photo you take which you get wrong is a learning experience. You learn from what you get wrong. You don't learn very much from the photos you get right. You get the praise for the photos you get right, and that's lovely. We all love the praise. But you don't actually learn anything from it. It worked. Hey, what is there to learn? You only learn when it didn't work. So you really need to embrace getting it wrong, because how are we ever going to learn as photographers if we never make any mistakes? It's okay, but just don't keep comparing yourself to other photographers to the detriment of your own. Fine, be inspired by other photographers. There's nothing wrong with that. Take a look at photos and go, oh wow, I'd love to do that. How did that person do that? What do I need to do to be able to create photos like that? What do I need to learn? Where are the gaps in my understanding so that if I wanted to create a photo like that I could? That's brilliant. But don't beat yourself up and think that, well, everybody else is creating amazing photos in the same way that everybody else's reality on Instagram and Facebook and what have you all seems to be beautiful, brilliant, perfect photos, when again they're only sticking up their best side. So with all that in mind, thank you very much for coming along, and next week, not 100% sure, I think what I might do is I'm going to look at a photo I did for a guy called it was a science show called Dr. Megaphone. That was quite fun to put together, so yeah, I think I'll probably look out that one for next week. In the meantime, if you haven't already, make sure you join the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. If you're and submit your images. If you've got anything that you would like a little bit of help with, a little bit of insight into, struggling with any difficulties, put them in the group and I can look at them in next week's podcast. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube on the recorded version, then please hit subscribe and click the little notification bell as well, so you're made aware of when the next episode will be. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you next Tuesday, hopefully. Okay, take care. Cheerio. Bye bye.